Hey friends, with an influx of new and returning players with the Into the Light expansion, I'm often asked the same new player questions that spur me to wonder what can the game do to bridge that gap of knowledge better within the game itself. With more and more systems being added into the game like Fireteam Finder, Guardian Ranks, and Starter Packs, although I can say that is a great start, there are still gaps in shuttling new players into mid and end game activities, which might be unbeknownst to them that the grass is greener in the late game. Aztecross recently made a proper new player guide, and while that can sustain fun for a while, I really do think Destiny 2 could use system improvements to successfully engage with the mid and end game. This is where Ritz comes in. He brought the idea up to me while I was running Onslaught, so we put pencil to paper and want to have a conversation about it. This will be a minimally edited video, but I hope the topic inspires more conversations and stories below that can help provide feedback for Bungie to faster implement what they think is the best sets of improvements. So now I leave the floor to Ritz to start the video.
The cliff between normal and endgame content is real, and everything up until around Legend Lost sectors can be ran through with any loadout in the game with very minimal thought. So how do we let new players acclimate to the mid and late game? They need new player skill growth opportunities.
So we've structured our video to have tutorials, MMO culture, and systems as the topics. So let's start off with tutorials. You want to take that one, Ritz?
Something to ease into the end game is needed. Quests, tutorial missions, etc. Time trials, parses are all good ways to introduce core concepts that they'll see later in those activities.
So an example of that was the Strand quest, where you have to learn your grapple and whatnot, do the time trial, to the music, and just more missions like that in the game, but for all parts of it. Void 3.0, Solar 3.0, etc. I think all of it could be useful.
A good example of that is players not being comfortable enough dealing with champions to enter endgame content with an adequate loadout. They'll often restrict themselves to double primaries simply because they view the champions as that big of a threat. Something like a New Light subclass type intro mission, but for specifically stunning champs with verbs, and giving the player maybe a mayhem modifier in it to make sure they can practice really dealing with champions with their abilities could help them get used to it.
I want to add to that my LFG experience, I noticed that the randoms there have zero faith in their teammates, so they set up a really safe but weak loadout that can handle all the champions, and just straight up don't ever expect the teammates to contribute. And maybe they don't even understand that their own subclass verbs can handle all the champions, so they end up going with the weaker loadout when they could have something stronger.
Players might also not see enough of a reason to give raids and dungeons a chance, so front-loading rewards for stepping foot into those activities would be great. I honestly see no reason not to give an extra reward for the first completion of a dungeon, a raid, and give out quests that show that. For me, in Destiny 2 Year 1, the Legend of Acrius quest was a big deal for me. It got me interested in raiding. It got me to do a Leviathan clear. And for me, that was a core experience for Destiny. Of course, things like that haven't really happened since then. We've seen it a bit again with the Buried Bloodline catalyst, but stuff like that could really make a difference.
I think in this case, quality, quantity, and the difference between completing and trying needs to be considered by Bungie. Think of, we just got Onslaught, for example, right? And at the very beginning, players found it more efficient to do the first 10 waves and also easier. But now that they've changed it, there is a reason to try to go farther in because it's more efficient. So maybe that could be the motivating factor for stepping farther and farther in. I'm not sure if they've still nailed it right now, but it's certainly better for me as an in-game player. I don't really know what the mid-game players are thinking, though.
Also, going off of that, something I think is really important to look at when creating these intros and tutorials is that a shorter, richer experience will teach a lot more than a checklist of accomplishments that are very neutral, very vague. Actually guiding the player's hand towards specific experiences will end up teaching them exactly what you want them to learn rather than just them figuring something out that may not even be good.
Perfect. Moving on to MMO culture. This is something that I added because I saw a lot of Twitter conversations about Destiny 2 is possibly the most toxic gaming community. I really wanted to just do some self-research and compare to other gaming communities like League of Legends and Dota, those come to mind. Like, really, dude, do you think Destiny is more toxic? Anyway, when I was looking at first-hand accounts of Destiny 2, I had to read between the lines on some of these page or paragraph responses on these threads. And what I understood is that these players are inexperienced, and that very likely what's happening is they're just new to MMOs in general, unfamiliar with MMO systems, and can perceive what are very normal conversations as toxic. An example of this that happens with friends is the gear check. Let's say you fail at wave 40 onslaught and you're wondering like what went wrong, what can we do better? And sometimes the answer really is if we had a slightly different weapon loadout or something like that, this situation can be completely avoidable. And it's not toxic to observe that. And even after the fact, I usually say it's faster if we go get you a rocket sidearm now. It'll save us hours in the future if we do that right now to help farm this activity in the future. Something like that. And so anytime somebody gets hit with that observation of what can be better, what's realistic, maybe do we trade? You play Warlock, I play Hunter, etc. They take that back and forth as potential toxicity, and it kind of scares them away from the MMO space, when that is just, in my opinion, a fairly normal interaction.
So to address these unfamiliarities with MMO systems, something that can be done is implementing a Sherpa system tied to Fireteam Finder to get people more used to playing with other players and calming with them.
Especially Sherpas, since they know it's assumed that they're here to help. So it's not seen as confrontational. It's seen as helpful. And they're also opting into the system, so you know they're willing to take some light criticism and understand it as just that, constructive criticism, not some sort of hate or toxicity.
I think that's about it for MMO culture. Did you want to touch on workshopping players within clans and communities?
Yes, I do want to take that one. So when I was playing Phantasy Star, I was fairly new to the game, and so how I learned the game is easily 10 years of communities have already been made in that game. And if you compare that to Destiny, we're 10 years in, and the difference in how the community conducts themselves is entirely different than what I experienced in Destiny, outside of some very, very small exceptions, which I will mention in the story. So with Phantasy Star, players do what are called workshops. Let's say I play the ranger character. Well, I would have like a higher level ranger take me and maybe 10 other rangers, put us in a Discord, share their screen, and go over every little thing to do to ease learning how to play endgame ranger. And then over time, each of us would take an activity with that same player watching our Discord stream over the shoulder to offer constructive criticism and tell us what our mistakes were so that we could fix it. It was like essentially real-time coaching. And that's just a normal thing that PSO2 players do for each other. And I just don't see the same thing in Destiny. But I am going to say the exception here. Ritz was the exception. When I wanted to learn high-level Gambit, I reached out to the Gambit community, and they workshopped me to death. Now I know too much about Gambit.
I think that's a good point to start talking about systems. And the first one we're going to talk about is the subclass and build crafting systems. Coming into year 10 of Destiny, a lot of the systems are daunting to approach. And maybe for a lot of people, they just don't want to put in the effort to figure out a build, figure out a subclass selection that gives them that power fantasy. And it either results in them not understanding the loadout well or not experiencing a power fantasy for quite a bit that's polished. Giving a preset of default loadouts to new players would be a great thing just to give them the experience of the base power fantasy of the different subclasses. Show them the intended play patterns of each class. Give them a basic Devour class, a basic Solar class. Doesn't have to be max fragment slots used. Just basically what the old subclass preset trees were.
They could even have custom names on it, like Vampire Warlock or something like that, with a little arrow showing you what it would. I know in Phantasy Star they had recommended perks for what goes together, but I'm not expecting that in Destiny. But some preset loadouts that very, very quickly describe what they're trying to accomplish with Power Fantasy would be very noticeable.
For sure. Especially because with the loss of the preset trees, getting a new player to just put on a subclass and go is much harder. Another point related to the breadth of the build crafting system is how players looking to optimize and build better just don't know anything about the things they're using. But there's no values in game, there's nothing to actually describe how much what you're using impacts the things they affect. Giving a toggle for when you're hovering a perk or a mod to show a detailed description with exact values or approximate values would make a world of a difference for helping players actually build loadouts they're confident in with stats to back them up. In League of Legends, hovering over items while holding shift shows their exact values, their exact scalings, and even performance stats throughout that match. I don't expect like that, but
Well, the
it's that kind of
game,
thing.
it does have a lore tab that activates very similarly.
Yeah.
And in the past, I think Destiny 1 history, we just had stat bars. We didn't even have numbers. And a lot of the stats are hidden, like zoom, aerial effectiveness. That was a stat in Destiny 1, and so forth. And Bungie seems motivated to give us some of that information over these last few years. But I still think they need to do more. And that might be a lore tab part 2, where it shows the advanced stats and exact values.
So even with Fireteam Finder, new players don't have a good avenue to Sherpas without leaving the game. We touched on this earlier, but right now the only good place to find Sherpas reliably is through Discords. In Final Fantasy XIV, there's the Novice Network, which is an alt chat for newcomers and Sherpas to discuss the game and ask for help and offer help with activities. Alt chat isn't necessary as an implementation in Destiny, as there's not really that much of an engagement with text chat established in the game, but creating a separate Fireteam Finder channel for mentors to opt into and newcomers to be offered would help not only give them access to the mid and end game smoother, but even just help people find new players that want help just doing campaigns, just doing patrol, bounties, strikes, anything.
Could even be a separate section of Fireteam Finder. Destiny does lack a lot of those MMO social opportunities. Like the towers, apparently a social space. The lighthouse is a social space, etc. The Hall of Champions, and they still have a long way to go in that regard. But I still think a new player chat or just able to reach out to somebody who can quickly answer a question besides going to a Twitch stream, keep it in game, that would be super noticeable.
This all hinges on mentor behavior being reportable and people knowing that they feel safe learning in that environment. They should be going into that space never doubting that the person coming to help them is malicious.
Yeah, it's assume that they're trying to help. I hope they don't suggest machine gun damage.
There's also the endgame PvE skill bubble. Good players have no reason to engage with anyone not playing as optimally as them. And the better you get at the game, the more noticeable the difference is between you and the people you're playing with, finding groups with, to the point where you start just only playing with your friends. Incentivizing pseudo Sherping would help alleviate this. Extra loot for experienced players to playing with less experienced players. This could be done through either a mastery certification, so maybe like Guardian ranks, but Guardian ranks after a couple tweaks to make them more reflective of your in-game achievements globally, not just seasonally. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that too. I try in my friend group, if somebody's willing, they're gonna learn the style that leads to successes the most, and they're also gonna be health geared. It is worth the time to do so in your own pockets of the community. I promise.
I think that's all the points we have on the list. Oh yeah, going back on the last point we just made, that has to be treated the same as the mentor novice dynamic from earlier. This has to be something where new players are rewarded for helping, or experienced players are rewarded for helping new players, but it isn't to a point where people are doing so exclusively for the rewards and treat the new players badly because of it. Like if they're reported for having malicious intentions, it needs to be taken seriously.
For sure. I could see that happening in a lot of activities in Destiny because realistically, a lot of these activities are soloable by some of the best players in the game. So a duo would be pretty comfortable if it meant extra rewards. And there is a tipping point where I could see a duo being kind of toxic to that new player. So I really do think they have to take those reports seriously. I think that
Yeah,
covers everything
that's
we had on the written document as far as topics go. So I hope what we talked about today, again, spurs some inspiration to write something down in the comment section about your own new player experiences, how you got involved in the Destiny community and climbed your way to endgame. Because I feel like that's all useful feedback for Bungie to implement a better future system. What do you think, Ritz?
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Perfect. Okay, so now I want to say why did we record the video in this style is I have a list of topics, a long list of topics that I would love to listen to a different YouTuber cover while I'm doing the dishes. I hope that today this suffices. You get that dish done, you eat that lunch, whatever you gotta do. I'll see y'all in the next one. I stayed up late getting this one done. Thank you, Ritz, too. I will link Ritz's socials and YouTube in the description below. Thank you, Ritz, for the idea.
No problem.